Okay, looks like we're on for our recording, so great. But this is a virtual mediation training to take our skills online, and Ann Coyne and Meg Martin are our guest presenters from the Susquehanna Mediation Center. So we're happy to have them here, and this is the second time they've been with our mediators, the second session that we've done here on virtual mediation, and they did a great job the first time. And so we know they'll do even better because they have even more experience over the last 3 weeks with even more mediations there. So, and I think I have some feedback, pardon me. So why don't Ann and Meg, why don't you take it over? They'll be sharing for about 35, 40 minutes, and then we'll have time for questions, and then a time for our case managers who are on this call, also Renaya Oden and Krista Rittenhouse, to chime in for an explanation of sort of how this relates to Advos's work, and then a little preview of what we'll be doing next week with our part 2 and some of our role playing. I'm going to ask folks to, when we jump into this part of the training, that we all mute, and I can probably, maybe I'll just say I will mute everyone's, or maybe Chris, can you do that? Chris Wendon?
Yep, sorry, I was muted.
Okay, sorry.
That was ironic.
So you will be muted now, and but if there are questions, you can raise your hand or put them in the chat box as we go along, and then we'll have a time for that back and forth at the conclusion of about a 20-minute, 25-minute presentation by Meg and Ann. Any more questions before we get started? Okay, Ann and Meg, take it away.
Great, can everyone see my screen? I just want to double check. Is that working? Okay, great. So thank you so much for having us back. We are really excited to talk to you about some of the things we've learned about doing virtual mediations in the time of COVID, and also talk with you all about your work in your center. So I'm Ann Coyne. I'm the Crisis and Rapid Response Case Coordinator for Susquehanna Valley Mediation.
And I'm Meg Martin. I am the case coordinator for all of our custody, court custody and self-referred mediations here that come through our center.
So just to give you a little bit of an idea of how we got started doing virtual mediations, I'm the case coordinator for the Crisis Rapid Response meetings, and those are referred to us by Children and Youth Services. And as the name might suggest, they are crisis meetings. And because they have to do with child welfare and child safety, they were deemed to be an essential service. So even when things were really shut down fully for COVID, we had to keep meeting. So we had our first virtual meeting via Zoom on March 19th.
Yeah, and so I do all the court-ordered custody mediations through our center. And so as the courts were, or as Pennsylvania was closing down, we got a call from our president judge on March 20th, basically saying we were non-essential and that all court mediations were going to be suspended indefinitely. So we had a little bit of a quiet time between March 20th and the 10th of April when I received a call from the court asking, would you be interested in doing virtual mediations? And we piggybacked off of a lot of the work that Ann had been doing with her crisis rapid response meetings and the process that she had developed. And we had a quick turnaround, and we had our first virtual mediation on April 14th. So just 4 days later, we had our first mediation.
So we're here to kind of tell you that if we can do it, and if we could do that on such a quick turnaround, then you can definitely do it. And here you see a photo of some of our mediators and our executive director, Susan Jordan, at a role play group. So we're inviting you to climb on the bus with us through this presentation, and we're going to take you through kind of the process of virtual mediation and share a little bit about what we've learned and what we're still learning.
Yeah, so our process, during our normal time, our process is that we have court referred mediations and self-referred. That has stayed the same. We have court orders that come in with a time frame and the deadlines, and that has not changed at all. We use 2 mediators for each mediation we do, and we practice the transformative model. So these things all have been the same. What has changed has been our use of technology, obviously. The amount of prep time it takes to do each and every mediation, going into it, during it, and after, and a lot of patience on everyone's behalf. So when parties are calling into the mediation center, they get a court order or they're self-referred. The intake process is me in the office talking with all the parties. This process has become a little bit longer because I'm explaining the virtual format. I'm doing a little bit talking about Zoom, helping the parties brainstorm about the way that it would be best for them to access Zoom. We live in a very rural area where a lot of our connectability is a problem, internet service. So it would be just brainstorming with our parties about what room in their house they have the best technology or best connectability. And also this might mean going outside or going to a free community Wi-Fi just to have the call. So we talked through all those different issues. We found pretty quickly that Zoom was not as much of a barrier, an obstacle as we anticipated. As with everything shutting down around the country, parties were already using Zoom for school, for work, and other court involvement. If they themselves hadn't used Zoom, then maybe their kid was doing it to connect with his teacher at school, or a family member or a neighbor was already using Zoom. So we found it really wasn't as big of a barrier as we anticipated. Prior to our mediation sessions, I asked the parties for everyone to download the Zoom app so that when I send them the Zoom link, all they need to do is click on that hyperlink and they're into the Zoom meeting at their scheduled time. We did a lot of preparation for our mediators in order to go virtual. We had practice and coaching sessions 3 or 4 times a week. Sometimes this meant Anne and I were doing coaching sessions one-on-one with mediators, and otherwise we did a lot of role play sessions. We weren't actually just coaching on Zoom. We were also coaching our mediators on how to use their own devices. Some mediators had to dust off their laptops or their computers they hadn't used before. And so it was really doing one-on-one with them for them to be comfortable and confident with their own technology. So that took a little bit of time for us. When I am pairing mediators for a mediation session, I was really careful to pair less confident mediators with technology with more experienced mediators. So we might have people who were great at mediating, but they just weren't quite comfortable with the technology, but they really, really, really wanted to do it. So, so we would pair them with mediators that were really experienced and were comfortable. And what we found was those less confident mediators after a session or two became more confident, and they were paired with even a less confident person. So we kind of worked our way out from the center that way. We developed a system from the start where I would meet with the mediators 20 minutes prior to a mediation Zoom call. As the case coordinator, I would work with them to iron out any potential tech issues that the mediators might be having. So that way, when the parties would get online, the mediators were completely comfortable. All their tech issues were worked out, and they could start the mediation session feeling really good. During that time, what we would do is do like sound checks and lighting checks. Sometimes, you know, with Zoom, you might have learned that if the light is not just right, you're just a big silhouette. And so being honest with the mediators, just saying, you know, you might want to turn on a light behind you, or maybe your background is not appropriate. Could you go to a place that has a little bit less going on? So we were just having to work out some of those things with our mediators that you're in other people's homes and you wouldn't normally do. We've also asked our mediators to shut down any other windows they might have open on their computer. If they, during the mediation session, they were going to write an agreement with the parties, we wanted them to not share any of their private information with the parties. And like I said, I, as the case coordinator, help with all tech issues as the parties enter the call. So yeah, when the parties are entering the call, so our mediators are already online, and our parties come into the waiting room, and I can tell the mediators, are you, the parties are here, are you ready to go? And when the mediators are all comfortable, we log the parties into the mediation session. And sometimes the parties might have tech issues. They're muted and they can't unmute, or their video is not uploading. So I stay on the call until the parties, all those issues are resolved, and everyone is on and can hear each other. We've asked our mediators to use the gallery setting during the Zoom, so that all the parties can see each other, and you can, that the mediators can see all the parties at the same time. We found this to be really important. And during the mediator opening, we call it a orientation. We have the mediators just kind of include a little bit about technology, just letting the parties know that that there might be glitches in the connection. If they need to call back, they can pop back into the Zoom call. Just anything that that might arise that that we hadn't thought of earlier. We found that it's really, really crucial that we are transparent about this process. It's a new process. There's a lot of things that that can go wrong and that might go wrong, and just to let everyone know that we're all in this together. And you know, you have to, that leads into the next, you have to have a go with the flow attitude, just to be willing and ready that if there is a challenge, that we'll address it as it comes up. The last thing that we found was really important is that the mediators use the parties' names before they do a reflection, because that helps with the parties to know who the mediators are talking to. So, that way it alerts them, and there's some eye contact there. So that has been one thing that we have asked our mediators to do.
So as we've learned kind of how to change our process or our prep work with both mediators and parties, we have become aware of some areas of ethical considerations or concerns that keep popping up. And we're bringing this up not to say that we are, the ethical experts and we have all the answers on these issues, but we just are thinking a lot about them now, and kind of want to bring some awareness to them for you as well. So one of those is the issue of confidentiality. We make sure that we keep things confidential on our end, but as we've moved to doing Zoom mediations, that has become more difficult to guarantee confidentiality on the parties' ends, just because we're not always able to see who's in the room. We had one big meeting where we thought we were just talking with one person on her phone, but then kind of at the very end, her boyfriend came in and we hadn't realized that he'd been in the room the whole time. So that's something to be aware of. And Meg talks with parties during intake to kind of brainstorm rooms where they can be alone, but that's an issue. Another thing to be aware about is capacity. So because people can be at home, they can be drinking, smoking, vaping, all sorts of things, and we can't control that. And we also can't be aware of that at all times. We had one mediation where a man kept going to the fridge and then was mysteriously getting more and more emotional as the mediation went on. And that was a time for our mediators to kind of check in and make sure that everything was okay and he was able to sign a legal document. So that's something to be watching out for, definitely. And then finally, choice. We follow the transformative model of mediation and just really want to honor the dignity and the choice of all of our parties, even if we can't agree with them or don't understand. And that is especially true when we're doing virtual mediations, especially when it comes to issues around domestic violence. So I won't go into specific cases or any incidents around domestic violence, but I will share a little bit about what we've learned. Even before going virtual, we would screen for domestic violence. Meg would do that just to make sure that the case was safe, and we still do that, and even more so during virtual mediations. But if it comes up that a party does go to mediation and there is some domestic violence, and that happens a lot in the rapid response meetings, We respect party choice on how they're choosing to participate or choosing to not participate. We don't try to uncover abuse or point out what somebody's not saying. We especially don't push people to say more. We acknowledge that they're making choices to keep themselves safe, and we respect that. We do have a safety plan prior to the mediation, and that's to keep our mediators and the parties safe, just so they kind of have a fallback plan, but it's still very much a learning process, and we're still doing research and training around domestic violence. So we've kind of learned some tricky areas, but we've also learned about some pros of virtual mediation. Some parties, I would say a lot of parties seem more comfortable because they're in environments that they're familiar with. The mediator can look at all of the parties at the same time, and that's if they use gallery view, which kind of in person, they wouldn't be able to do that normally. And they can also see themselves and work on their nonverbals. So for instance, if a party is really pushing all of your buttons, you can see yourself reacting in real time on the screen. Take a few breaths and kind of check yourself that way. Virtual mediation also reduces barriers for people with transportation or mobility issues. As Meg said earlier, we're in a pretty rural area, and sometimes it can take around an hour for parties or even mediators to get to our center, and that's no longer an issue, which makes it just much more convenient for parties and mediators. It's, you don't have to take off as much time for work, you don't have to buy gas, you can just kind of join from the comfort of your own home. However, there are some challenges, as you may suspect. One of those is connectivity and delays. Meg touched on this earlier. Some people don't have Wi-Fi, some people don't have devices that they can use Zoom on. Some people have to call in on phones and they pay by the minute. And that's definitely an equity issue that we are still working on and still thinking about pretty deeply. New technology can cause frustration and anxiety. This goes both for parties and for mediators and also staff. And sometimes that can bleed into the mediation and affect how things go. There are distractions, pets, kids, lots of things going on that we can't control for. It can be more difficult also to read nonverbal cues just because you're not in the same room as people. And it can be hard to maintain eye contact. You kind of have to trade off between looking at your screen and seeing what people are doing or looking at your camera and making it seem like you're making eye contact. And again, this is the confidentiality issue. We can't control who overhears, and that's especially challenging when there are children in the home.
So for technical tips, our biggest one is practice, practice, practice. I touched on it earlier and say it again. normally when we're in regular times, we do at our mediation center, we have 3 role play groups a month that we meet with our mediators, and they come in and they practice the transformative model together. And when we were going into the virus and practicing for virtual mediations, we actually were having 3 to 4 role play groups a week. And those groups would often pour out into a one-on-one with Anne and myself, just to get our mediators more comfortable with, like I said before, their computer and also the Zoom settings. As the mediation center, we standardized our Zoom settings to enable the waiting room. We found this to be really important. That way we can invite the parties into the room once the mediators are ready to go. And that way, we can work out any glitches on our end. And we've also set the audio and the video to start automatically so that hopefully that no one is muted and that just uploads as they join the room, join the virtual mediation. We recommend our mediators use a computer or tablet, not their phone. We do have a mediator that did use a phone and it worked fine. We find our parties are often using their phones. They probably don't have a computer or a laptop, so they are using their phones. But for our mediators, we recommend they have a screen where they can see all the parties at the same time, and it's a little bit easier for them to get a visual of our parties if they do that on the computer or tablet. And like I said before, we have, it's delicate, but we've had to get used to giving and receiving feedback to our mediators about lighting and sound and background. So just giving our mediators that information and letting them know that, we can't see you or we can't hear you, and this might work best for you. So for best practices, we find that transparency is key from the at the start of intake all the way through to the end of the mediation. Just being letting the parties know and the mediators know about the process. And this is new to us. It is how it is how it is right now, and for now, and we just need to roll with it as best we can. And that is, it's uncomfortable at times, but you know, hopefully we'll all be a little bit more versed as we go. When we do our mediation orientation, we include the technical information, and I provide the service of helping all the parties get online if any technical assistance is needed. So that's been really nice for our mediators. They feel like they're supported along the way, and that's not up to them. They can focus on doing the mediation and not the technical assistance. Mediators might need to be more directive, and this is something that's new to us in the transformative model. You know, if there's a dog barking in the background, or there's someone mowing the lawn, they might need to mute the parties, and so someone else can be heard. So this has been giving permission to our mediators to do that has been it's been strange, but it's something that we had to do. And just recognizing that reflections and summaries are more important than ever. Getting in there and having those cues and getting in there at the right time has been really important. And you know, the attitude of go with the flow and just being upfront about the difficulties and adjusting in the process when necessary has been really, really important for us.
So some of the key takeaways that we've learned, we've hit on before. One of them is that there's a very steep learning curve. We had a tight turnaround for when we had to start doing virtual mediations, and it was pretty difficult in the beginning. Meg and I had some conversations where we were really kind of hitting a wall, but we got through it, and I think that's true for our mediators too, is a steep learning curve, but it's okay now. Again, transparency, Meg's touched on this, I've touched on this, but it's so important to build that relationship with your parties, with your mediators, also within your staff. So just be transparent about challenges and learning process, and just kind of name what's happening and be clear about expectations. Practice and preparation. Again, this kind of on a personal note has been nice for me to form stronger connections with mediators, just because we've been having one-on-one sessions, and I think it's helped us kind of grow socially as a mediation center as well. Again, Zoom allows staff to pop in and out of meetings, so mediators feel really supported, and help is always on the way, so they're never really on their own if a challenge comes up. And then finally, I would say that this has been pretty intense. It's really pushed us out of our comfort zone, both as a mediation center and also personally for me. But I think we've grown as a result, and we definitely are stronger, and I think are growing in a lot of interesting areas because of going to virtual mediation. So that's it from us, but I think Renai is opening it up for questions maybe.
Can you guys hear me? Awesome. All right, so I would like to open the floor up for questions. If you would like to ask a question, you could raise your hand, or you could put the question inside of the group chat. And you can unmute yourself when you're asking your question.
So I think Susanna has a question to start with.
Yes, I have at least a couple. I'm Susanna Gao. I'm also been a mediator with the Neighborhood Dispute Settlement, which is based out of Harrisburg. A couple of other things that I didn't hear you talk about, so maybe, are you using breakout rooms for, you are, okay. So we can talk about how we would use those for private caucuses, I think, right, with the parties?
Yeah, so our model is a little bit different. So we don't have the private caucuses kind of built into the model, but if parties, sometimes they get really worked up and they need a break, we can use breakout rooms for that. And then also for the crisis rapid response meetings referred to us by children and youth, it's kind of written to how they go that private family time must be offered. And for that, we just put the children and youth workers in a breakout room. So it's just the family and the mediators in the main room.
May I ask another question?
Yes, go ahead, Susanna.
So chat, we use Zoom at Penn State a lot. Chat functions are a potential, I mean, we talked a little bit about it. How are you using chat or not? And what's the chat function, between mediators, I can see could have some advantage. But I think the concern we talked about last week was between the parties, whether they, and if the mediator can't see that, that could be an issue. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that.
So you can change the chat settings,
Yes.
and we standardize this across the mediation center. I think we have it so that the host can talk to people and everyone can kind of do a large open chat, but they can't privately message each other. Is that right, Meg?
Yeah, that's right. We have disabled that chat for our participants, but as the host, when people are coming in, often if they're in the waiting room, I send them a chat just saying the mediation will be starting soon. If one of the parties hasn't arrived and we're waiting for them, I usually give it about a couple minutes, and I don't want people to think that I'm not there and that I'm not seeing them. So I just kind of coddle them a little bit through that, just through the chat, but once we're up and mediating the chat, we're not really using the chat. I did have a mediation where I wanted the mediators were, I wanted to tell them something that I needed to tell them. So I chatted with them directly, but as it turns out, they didn't see the chat because they were so focused on the visual. So so they can use that, but the participants cannot.
Thank you, Susanna, for your question. Does anyone have another question? Don't all unmute yourselves at once.
I got a couple questions.
Okay.
I've been hearing a lot about confidentiality, like people breaking into Zoom and that kind of thing. Has that been a problem? How have you addressed that?
Confidentiality is definitely it's hard. It's a gray area for us. I mean, coming in, having a mediation in the mediation center where we are, we know we close the door, the two parties are in the room with the mediators or however many are there. When you're doing a Zoom call, you don't know who is behind, who could be on the couch sitting there, if there's a child in. So we have sort of, adopted a little bit. We're not there to police people, so we want them to know that we are there, that it's not something that we are going to address. If a party addresses it and they say so and so, his girlfriend's in the room and she's talking, we would address that once that's brought up by the other party. But as mediators, we have chosen that because of confidentiality, because it is an issue, that it's not for us to police, and we're going to go with the parties, and if it's something that they need to bring up and they want to talk about, then that's when we will address it.
We also use the waiting room function so we can see who's joining. So if it's a number that's not that we're not familiar with, or it's a name that we're not familiar with, we can double check our records and message them and also kick them out. But that hasn't been an issue yet for us.
Just on the back end, Matt, one of the things that Advos is doing on the back end of our settings, all the meetings automatically generate a number ID. Mm-hmm. So there's no regular set ID, which makes it even harder to kind of hack in the back of a meeting.
Okay.
So added to that, and what Anne said about enabling a waiting room gives you a couple pieces of functionality that protect the virtual sphere to address that specific question you had about the virtual security.
Okay.
And I should add also, sorry, just to jump in one more thing. You can also lock the room once all the parties are in the room. So okay. once parties have everyone's in the room, and before as the host, if I am starting the meeting, I pass off the host capability to one of our mediators, and then when I leave, they lock the room so that someone can't just Zoom bomb your mediation session.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. Did you have any other questions?
I did. I have one more.
Awesome.
And I don't know if you've tried to other services like WebEx or Skype for Business. You said you use Zoom. Did you find that's the best one for this, or can you kind of compare and contrast the options that we have for the virtual mediations?
So I think one of the advantages of Zoom for us is that our court systems use it. So people are already familiar with it, both with the agencies we work with and the parties. We have some experience with WebEx, and I know that some children and youth agencies near us use Google Duo because that automatically puts closed captions on, and that's easier for people who are hard of hearing. So that's one advantage of Google Duo that Zoom does not have.
Have you found that any of them are easier than the other ones to use, or just your experience with Zoom, you were more comfortable using that one?
Yeah, I personally found Zoom to be really easy to use. I
Okay.
mean, from the moment this virus kind of happened, I had never used Zoom before, and we had to practice Zoom that night, and I could not believe that, you know, really just downloading the app and clicking on the hyperlink, we were in the call. And honestly, for all of the mediations we've had, and we've had a lot of them, I have not had, I mean, I've had some connectability problems, but I've never had anyone complain or have a problem with getting onto Zoom.
Okay. Have you had any, like a lot of I work for the Public Utility Commission, and we have a lot of elderly clients. And so a lot of them are not only technologically challenged, but don't have access to even a cell phone. So
Right.
have you found ways to try and like get around that to help people?
Yeah, so I think, you know, we said for intake, that has been a little bit more time consuming on my part, and I'm sure Anne for her rapid response as well, just kind of working with especially elderly people to feel comfortable with technology. I have helped spend a couple hours helping people get online, and usually it just entails them getting their one of their children's smartphones.
Okay.
It does seem to me, and you might feel differently about this, but almost everyone, if they don't have a smartphone, someone in their family has one. The girlfriend can borrow his girlfriend's phone or her son's phone. So I have not had that be a problem. But also with Zoom, you can call into any of the meetings. So we have had mediations where we don't have a video connection, we just have a audio connection. And honestly, because of our internet problems, sometimes that's better because it's a more successful conversation if you just have a good audio rather than have bad video.
Okay.
And we'll also add, not to keep saying transparency, but transparency has been really important for us. We had one rapid response where the mother couldn't figure out how to get onto Zoom, and then she got on, and then her phone died. So she called in again, and then that had bad internet, so she had to call in again. So we were able to get through it just because we were being really clear about what was happening and expectations. So even when things do go terribly wrong, it still is okay.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, Matt, for your great questions. Donna, do you have a question?
Yes, in some appointments that I have been on, it has seemed important to me to have a contingency plan, partly because my own internet has been very unstable and I don't have control over that. So I have found it's helpful to make agreements up front that if my internet dies, I will try to get back on. If that doesn't work, I will call you, or vice versa. You know, if yours dies, what are we going to do if there's a service interruption in the middle of it? So that everybody's on the same page and not wondering what's going on. Have you had plans like that?
We do, and partially that's why I start every call with the mediators, and so to make sure we work out some of those technology. But in the event that, and we don't know it's going to happen, that someone's internet bumps off, it is a big. We use 2 mediators for every session. So so we had one where a mediator got bumped off because of her internet 10 minutes into the call. And she quickly called me, and I popped back into the Zoom mediation, and it was like we never missed a beat. I was able to just support the mediator that was talking, and then our mediator who got bumped off the Wi-Fi came back on, and I popped back out again. So you know, again, the transparency was just, you know, working together as a group. There was no apologies. It's just something that happens, and just being on the same page that, you know, you do have support when that does happen, because you never know when it's going to happen, and it's really uncomfortable. But in this case, you know, we were able to just work together at very, very spur of the moment, last minute, and get it all work out.
Thank you, Donna. That was a good one. I think that I would have asked that one too. Chris, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. Having been at in the last session, and having talked with Ann and Meg, I know that one of the sort of innovations and opportunities you've taken advantage of is document sharing. We will probably do it differently than you do, but can you say a little bit about how that has helped the your mediation process to have the mediators do document sharing virtually through Zoom, or screen sharing of documents?
Do you want to touch on that, Anne?
Sure. So we transitioned to Google Docs, which was definitely a challenge for some mediators. So that was kind of during our learning curve process where
It was a challenge for me too, just to be clear.
Meg creates folders in the Google Drive, which is just kind of like a place where documents can be shared. And there's a virtual folder that has all of the information that mediators might need. So all of the documents that she sends parties, as well as an MMO and an MMA. So in case parties come to an agreement, that's in the folder. And then, so when Meg sends out the link to the Zoom link, and then she also sends out a link to that folder with the documents. And before the call, when she's on the call with the mediators, kind of just planning, one of them opens that folder, that virtual folder, and then can screen share and show the parties what they're typing out. So that's been really helpful because parties can see in real time how the agreement looks, and it's easier to identify any areas that they want to be changed, and it's just more seamless than kind of reading from your computer to the parties. Did that make sense? That was a lot of kind of process talk. Okay.
Yeah, and we use 2 mediators. So oftentimes when we begin that 20 minutes before our parties come on, the mediators discuss, you know, who's going to take the lead on the documents and who's going to take the lead on explaining the model and explaining mediation, and they go from there. So it's usually known at the beginning of before the parties come on that, you know, I'm going to be in charge of writing. If the parties write an agreement, if they choose to write an agreement, I'm going to be in charge of doing that and make sure that that person is comfortable with that.
And there again, it sounds like pairing somebody with skills or experience is important with newer or folks that are less comfortable with that technology. That there's that flexibility in that co-mediation.
And just practicing that technology again and again and again. We said it before, you know, that people were having to really use their computers like they had never used it before. A lot of our mediators might check their email, but they didn't know Google Docs. They don't know, you know, they were very specific in what they used their computer for, and we were asking them to do much more than they ever anticipated doing with that. So there was a lot of learning and a lot of, you know, just walking through it and being really patient. And we got to know each other really well during that process.
And then related to that, one of the other discussions, how those documents were then shared afterwards with the client. They were, at least with the neighborhood dispute settlement, they didn't want us using our personal emails. They, I guess, with that folder, then your office or whatever would share that with the clients for final signatures, or how did that go?
Actually, because of we were trying to not do any sharing for signatures because of the virus. So we get a verbal consent. We got agreement with our judge here that as long as we have a letter that says that the parties gave their verbal consent for these documents, and so that is part of our our mediation orientation, before we begin the mediation, we get verbal consent to mediate. And then if they sign an agreement, whether they see the document online via screen sharing or the mediator is writing up the agreement, we actually read it back to them, ask for verbal consent, put that on the document, and then the next day when I open up my my Google folder and I see what if they wrote an agreement, I then download it and put it into a PDF and send it to the parties as an attachment. Share it with them before I share it with the court.
And then I have a slightly different question. Backgrounds. Live backgrounds versus the virtual background, like that beautiful picture that Donna has. Your sense of which approach? I can see probably there's pros and cons.
You know, we don't have any rules, but we have had we have one mediator whose husband is an avid safari hunter. And so when she does her virtual mediations, there's lots of animals in the room. It's a little creepy. And we have one mediator who tends to mediate in front of his open closet door. And you know, we haven't had to say, you know, we need to, but we will give that feedback if necessary. But for the most part, virtual backgrounds are fine. I don't find them to be, I don't know, Anna, if you have any problem with them.
The only thing is, I was on one meeting where one of the parties had a virtual background that was like a looped video, and that was pretty distracting. So that had to go, and we had to be give some feedback that was maybe a little bit uncomfortable there. But that's really the only example I can think of.
Yeah.
Just parenthetically, I would never use a virtual background when I was doing a session. I was just using it today.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for your questions.
Sorry, real quick, just got one question. Anne
okay.
or Meg, have you guys ever recorded sessions at all?
No.
No.
That would violate confidentiality for us, just because what happens in a mediation can't be used as evidence or can't be kind of taken record of. We shred our notes if we take notes, so we don't record sessions. People have asked to record sessions, and sometimes people come in fired up wanting to record sessions, but because all parties have to consent in Pennsylvania to be recorded, we say no, and that's the end of it.
Okay. We are out of time, but I just wanted to ask if there's anybody who have a really pressing, burning question that they would like to ask. Going once, going twice. All righty, I'm going to hand it over to, I believe, Chris or Krista. I'm going to hand it over to Krista, who's down there in that box.
Thanks everyone for the rich both information, Anne and Meg, and for the questions to bring this. I'd kind of forgotten how exciting this was to hear all of this again. I'm glad to go through this round two. Listening through this the first time, I was like, oh yeah, this is good. And the second round of questions, there's new stuff that comes up. So I just appreciate all of you for your engagement here. Realize that our style is a little bit different than the Susquehanna Center. Obviously, there's a lot of translation of skills and practices that we can learn from. So that is part of what we've discussed as a staff. That is, many of you have received communication from us that this is a part one of our training, and part two will be coming up next week at the same time. And that's going to be a lot of digging into our specific advos practice, but then also we have mediation and we have restorative justice that has the kind of a division within our programs of specific skills and considerations to take into each of those programs beyond this. So looking forward to providing that as well. And it has allowed us to dig into some of those questions a little bit as a staff. And something that we have taken away from these part one trainings and hearing Anne and Meg's reflections and thinking through how we go about this. The second program, or the second part, is going to include a lot more of role playing and other examples of chances to give feedback to one another and practice some of the things in situations? How do we respond in the moment? So that's kind of the stuff coming up, but wanted to, I think, Chris, there's a PowerPoint, if we can share it. One of the things that we have talked about is, something that's common across our practices is, actually, I think it's the slide before that, is that we share ground rules kind of before a victim offender conference, before mediation, some of these ground rules. And so some of the things that we would ask in addition to some of those scripts, is asking people, and this is part of the transparency, to have minimal interruptions. Letting people know to mute their mic, especially if there's other noise in the background or anything like that. Asking people to be doing solo tasking. When we're on our devices, it's really easy to also be checking email or get a text or, have kids in the background. So again, there is a little bit of limitation around this. If you have a 2-year-old, you need to pay attention to your 2-year-old. But within what we can control, asking people to be focused on the meeting in front of them. Being willing to sit in silence. That sometimes silence is awkward, and maybe more so on Zoom than in a regular facilitation, but it can also be needed for our processes. So naming something like that. We talked about muting people. So letting people know that the mediator may need to mute someone given different background noise or those types of situations, but that we try to ask permission before doing something like that. Check. Let people know if there's going to be technical issues, and this goes off of Donna, your question about setting up that plan of what happens if we get kicked off and the transparency issue. So kind of setting that as part of a ground rule. And this is a broader list as you're going into something. But then asking people, is there anything else that you would want to be a part of our guidelines today for this conversation? So those are some of the things that we've talked about, is adding to the general introduction to our processes. And these conversations can be continued. You can ebb and flow with what feels like the needs are for each situation. So again, really, really excited for the information that has come out of this. We have about 10 minutes to wrap it up. And I would like to do a little bit of a recap round here of kind of how we close this out in the last little bit, a chance to offer anyone the chance to give a final reflection of one takeaway that you take away from this first round of training, whether that's an encouragement or a key skill that you felt like was really important to highlight, or a concern that remains for you. I'm going to put 3 folks on the spot. This is going to be Matt, Paula, and Nancy. The reason it's going to be you is because you're on the left-hand column of my screen, and that's how I decided. So, and then anyone else, if there's other people that have comments that they'd like to share as a takeaway, I would love to hear from every single person. I'm not sure we're going to have a chance for that as we wrap up, though we may have time for that. So let's hear, Matt, would you give us a final takeaway that you've kind of had from what you've appreciated, or what concern you may still have after hearing this training? And I'm going to unmute someone else's. Can you unmute yourself?
I muted myself, sorry. I appreciate it. With my job at the PUC, we do actually a lot of telephonic mediation. So the technology part is kind of already there. But for the bigger cases, we do in-person mediations, and trying to figure out how to do that now is not allowed to. I work in Harrisburg, and our office is still physically closed and will be for a while. So trying to coordinate some kind of visual ability to see each other or mediating, I think, is very helpful, especially in what we do. And there's a lot of, like, my boss is very nice, but she's not computer literate whatsoever. I get the how to put my email, questions all the time, you know what I mean? So just knowing that it's not as hard as it seems to be, and if I can convey that to her somehow, it'd be fantastic. And just realizing that, if you put these issues out there in the beginning. Hey, you know, we're learning this process together, and that's part of being vulnerable with mediation. I think that would help. You know, I think it's a plus that, you know, we're in this together. So I think my takeaway is that I think it provides a common ground for everybody on the mediation that, hey, if, you know, we can experience this together and help each other through this technical process, I think that encourages people to work together more. So that's my takeaway.
Thank you. Yeah, the importance of that collaboration and highlighting that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Paul, do you have anything that you'd be willing to share with us as a takeaway? And you're totally welcome to pass, just so you know. Paula, are you able to hear?
Yeah, now I am.
Sorry.
I unmuted me, then you muted me again.
Sorry, I was trying to help you out.
That's okay. I mean, for me, I guess, you know, thinking about the considerations for confidentiality, I think is critical. And the more I think about it, the more people you could have listening in. So I think the first, I guess, preparations and kind of talking about technology and talking about how it's going to be handled with the parties, I think could prevent that from happening. And then I would feel more comfortable knowing that I was just dealing with the parties and not some other adults or kids being in the room. So I think the takeaway is the preparation and then being concerned to at least address confidentiality issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And Nancy, do you have anything you'd like to share with us or willing to share with us as a takeaway?
Yeah, the two things that I thought were really interesting that hadn't occurred to me. One was the capacity issue, that when you're doing a mediation and the parties are at home, you know, the example you used about the party going to the refrigerator or this or that. And I guess I hadn't considered that could be something that could occur, you know, in the course of a mediation while the party is at home. So that sort of put that on my radar to be a little more cognizant of what's going on in the background, and if the party is moving or, you know, to the refrigerator or consuming something or whatever, that it would not have occurred to me, quite frankly, but for the example you gave. So that was really helpful. And the other issue about technology being stressful or can cause stress. I know it causes stress for me at times, particularly when it's not working right. And for example, I was out on the patio trying to sign in today, and I guess my internet wasn't as strong out there, and I kept dropping, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to be late to get onto this thing, you know, and I could tell that you really get a little bit pumped up when the technology isn't cooperating. And so I think that making me more sensitive to technology issues that other participants might be having, and how that may be adding a level of stress to the already stressful dispute situation that brought them to the mediation, was helpful for me to sort of keep in mind as well. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I know there's a bunch of other people on the call that we haven't heard from yet, either in questions or reflections. So we have a couple more minutes yet. If we haven't heard your voice, even if we have, well, would love to invite a few other people to share what has stood out to them. And I would just throw an additional, if you would want to say something that, like, I hope this comes out in training too. Feel free to say, like, this is a specific thing that I want to dive deeper into with you as staff. So for the last couple of minutes, anything else that you guys want to offer as reflections or things to focus on in the future?
This is Alan.
Okay.
I'd like to, obviously it's going to take practice. I mean, so and I noticed in the next session, we're going to be going over a lot of the ground rules and documents and all that. So it'll be interesting to see what that is, since I'm technologically challenged to start with. So it'll be interesting to see what it takes to really make it work. But I appreciate it.
Yeah, I think we're excited to do some of these, diving into the nitty-gritty a little bit more and getting you guys to be able to give feedback to each other and experience them and not just hear about it. So thank you. Marjorie, I think you're also saying something. Yep, there you are.
I thought it was interesting, and this has a lot with the sharing that we're all doing with folks from other agencies and whatever is what I'm have the sense of. And the nomenclature of the things such as the rapid response. You know, in nursing, we have that. And I'm sure that it's sort of a compatible concept, but I'm not sure what it is, Krista, that we do in our process that is parallel to that, or if it even is.
Yeah, I would say in terms of just in the parallels, our program definitely is not the same. Other than that, in some of the, for example, in victim offender conferencing, bringing together, there's sometimes added parties where mediation is the two parties. If you have victim offender conferencing with your person who has caused harm, your person who has been harmed, and you support people that might be there. Occasionally there'd be a probation officer or something like that. So sometimes where I see some of that parallel is in the broadening of the people in the room and how that works. And still a lot of those considerations around how do we care for the people in the room, those things remain consistent across the board of bringing people together, helping them feel safe. So the intimate structure of it, not a direct correlation, although the practices, yes. Does that answer your question, Marjorie?
It did. And I have a second piece here is I wanted to ask, where can we find the slides?
That's gonna be a question for Fitz.
Where do you find the slides? In the Facebook? Is it in Facebook?
No, I can send them out by email.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So
Amy
yeah.
had a question too, I believe. It's maybe our last question. Amy, you were leaning forward. I'm using my Zoom body language scanner.
I
Did you
think
have
I
a
was
question?
actually just stretching. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Come up with something quick.
Okay, I do have a quick question under pressure, which is that I participated in last fall's mediation training over the course of, I think it was 3 or 4 wonderful days, and then went back to work and got really busy, and so haven't been able to participate since then. And given this new virtual world, I was really hoping that I would be able to shadow a couple of mediations or sort of lurk and learn and remember and listen before I was in the role of mediator myself. And I wonder if Zoom makes that possible or impossible.
I will say, I'm unmuted. Renee, I'll let you respond right after me. I will say for victim offender reconciliation dialogues, which is not the program you're talking about, but we have, that has been easier from my standpoint to connect people in terms of location. That for the victim offender dialogues, we're often going to people's homes. And so that's a little bit different from mediation, but it has made that easier to pair people. We do a single facilitator for VOC, but to have a co-facilitator for peer feedback, as well as for experienced versus less experienced, to be able to pair people up that way. So that has been easier from my perspective. Renee, I'll let you speak to what your plan would be for mediation.
So I would say that it could be a possibility. I would have to talk with the parties beforehand to see if they're interested or open to having someone observe. But it could definitely be a possibility because I'm even trying to observe a couple of virtual mediations too.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so really appreciate that question, and I've been asking, and Renee and I are coordinating too of, yeah, how do we get permission, or making sure that we're asking that permission to allow that this is a chance that we can do that potentially more easily, and so making sure that that's available to folks for lots of different reasons. So we are about out of time. I know folks have dinner to get to. I appreciate you all coming up for a training like this on a Tuesday afternoon towards the end of the day. So yeah, just really appreciate your showing up and being engaged, and for all the expertise, Anne and Meg, for showing up again for us to do this. So yeah, really appreciate all of you for being here and for being a part of our team and offering healing and conflict management to our county in Lancaster and the ways in which you are impacting this community in lots of really awesome ways. So I think you guys don't always get to see it the ways that we do, because we get to hear the feedback from all the different parties that are doing this. And you guys sometimes don't get to hear all of the amazing feedback. And so yeah, just wanted to say that you guys are an awesome team. Thank you for coming to this training. We will be sending out further information. I know a bunch of you have signed up for the part 2 already. For next Tuesday at 4, that one's gonna be an hour and a half. Fitz has something else to share before we wrap it up.
Just